Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Aliens and Angels podcast. And welcome back, or I should say, welcome to 2025. I believe this is the year that things are finally going to start to fall into place. Last week, I started off the new year with part one, chapter one of my new book called Transdimensional Meet the New Neighbors. And today we will read and discuss part one, chapter two. And for those of you who have already purchased your copy, feel free to follow along, add your comments, and ask me questions arising from the content. If you do not own your own copy, the links for both the Kindle and paperback versions are featured below in the description. All of the links are featured below. And thank you in advance for liking, commenting, subscribing, and please do share my content with your friends. And I'm happy to announce that channel memberships are now available, so you can help to support my channel and receive my perks. So how's everybody doing today? Are you getting adjusted to 2025? I know last year went by so very, very fast. And now we're on to another year. So I'm just waiting for a few folks to arrive in the live chat. And I'm actually going to finish off talking about chapter one, part one, chapter one in the book. And I just want to start by making sure everybody understands that I am not a historian. I'm not a doctor. I can't comment and I won't comment on anything medical. But there's a part of history that a lot of people are not familiar with. And I call this last bit in chapter one, the false matrix suppresses ET contactees. And I'll give you a trigger warning. Some of this information might be shocking and disturbing, but it is nonetheless true. And you can Google the terms and look this information up for yourself. It's there for everybody to see. Just so you know, I'm not making it up. So we're on page 14 of my book. I've got it here. And if you've got your copy, open up and you can follow along. So again, the subheading is the false matrix suppresses ET contactees. It is the policy of many ET groups to suppress our memories before we return to our everyday lives, so that we can remain embedded in the Earth's social and political construct for soul development. However, sometimes this is also done for our own protection, because even today, many humans have their rights violated as they are diagnosed with mental illness labels when they go public with their ET experiences. Even in 2022, ET contact was considered to be an extreme deviance requiring medical and psychiatric intervention. History is full of accounts of more insane asylums throughout the Western world than you could ever imagine. So it is no wonder that we seldom find historical depictions of off-world and ET contact. In the 1980s, the medical industry mostly switched from physical lobotomies to chemical lobotomization. And these pharmaceuticals are holding back the spiritual and transdimensional progress of the human race. What is a lobotomy? According to Wikipedia, a lobotomy or leucotomy is a form of psychosurgery, a neurosurgical treatment of a medical disorder that involves severing connections in the brain's prefrontal cortex. The surgery causes most of the connections to and from the prefrontal cortex, the anterior part of the frontal lobes of the brain, to be severed. We run the risk of this type of intervention when we go public with our paranormal experiences. The powers that control this earthly construct are so threatened by our emergent insight that they pathologize these experiences and punish the truth tellers with brain altering treatments, which destroy our ability to be aware of and share our natural paranormal realities. This serves to suppress forbidden knowledge and is part of the intensive fear campaign, which further perpetuates programs of social stigmatization and isolation. According to NRP.org, about 50,000 people received lobotomies in the United States. About 10,000 of these procedures were transorbital lobotomies, and the rest were mostly prefrontal lobotomies. Walter Freeman performed about 3,500 lobotomies during his career, of which 2,500 were his ice pick procedure, and in 1967, Freeman performed his final lobotomy on a patient who died from a brain hemorrhage. LiveScience.com claims that surgical lobotomy is rarely, if ever, performed today, and if it is, and I quote, "It's a much more elegant procedure. You're not going in with an ice pick and monkeying around," end quote. They claim that removal of specific brain areas, which is the procedures are called psychosurgery, is only used to treat patients for whom all other allopathic treatments have failed. So if you stick to your conviction that you've had a paranormal experience or UFO contact or extraterrestrial contact, and they can't cure you, with pharmaceuticals, then lobotomies are still considered. As I mentioned, in the 1980s, surgical lobotomy procedures were mostly replaced with antipsychotic drugs and other psychotropic pharmaceuticals. ET contact is still considered to be extreme mental deviance, and so at the very least, disclosure is often met with stigma, ridicule, and psychotropic medications, which cause chemical lobotomization. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the process, prior to the 1980s, actually in some cases later than the 1980s, if someone was having paranormal or ET experiences, the concerned family would report them to the doctor, who would make a referral to a psychiatrist, who would then give his official diagnosis and a label of some type of serious mental illness. He would then order treatment, and if the experiencer refused, they were institutionalized and treatment was forced upon them. Conditions were often so horrible in psychiatric institutions, with so many human rights violations, that the patient would eventually agree to anything in order to get back their freedom. This also supplied the motivation to stop them from talking about the experience. But the medical professionals usually literally remove the ability to remember from the patient's brain with psychosurgery. Most often, though, the family doctor could perform the ice pick method right there in his office. Since most people are conditioned to do what the doctor orders, they would go into the office for this treatment and come out 10 minutes later with a whole new personality, compliant, placid, and docile, a model citizen to help maintain the social control of the construct. Now, I also want to mention one of the most famous cases of people having their personalities altered through this type of psychosurgery was JFK, John Kennedy, who was a former president of the United States. His sister had this done to her. And so I'm not going to get into details about what the ice pick method is actually about because it's pretty gruesome. But if you want to Google it, knock yourself out, you can find all kinds of information about this procedure. So I'm not saying that there are that treatment for various mental disorders using pharmaceuticals, sometimes maybe that's necessary. I don't know. I'm not a doctor. I can't have an opinion on this. But I do know this is part of our history, and very few people know about it. And it sure explains why you have not heard more from extraterrestrial and UFO experiencers, in the last 150 years. In addition, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of the Mental Disorders, called the DSM, is the handbook widely used by clinicians and psychiatrists in the United States and other nations to diagnose psychiatric illnesses. It may have some limited value, but many of these illnesses are actually the weaponization of normal, healthy behaviors and perceptions, which serve as evidence of deviance. To illustrate, consider that the DSM-2 was only 92 pages long. The DSM-3 swelled to 482 pages. The DSM-4 bloated to 886 pages, and the DSM-5 surged to 1,120 pages in length. The symptoms contained in any of the DSMs are not well supported with research or solid medical evidence, yet they are considered to be very unhealthy to the individual and society. But the truth is that these symptoms threaten the continuation of the construct and its false matrix of control. So let me give you a bit of history. So according to the research that I've done, back when the DSM was first being made, it was a group of psychiatrists, psychologists, mental health professionals, and they basically all gathered in a room, and they couldn't really go home until they agreed upon certain diagnosed criteria. And of course, as with any group, some personalities have a stronger influence than others. And basically, they would be so long deciding um, which criteria qualified as a mental illness that the softer personalities would give into the stronger ones. They just go, okay, okay. And that's how they created the DSM, the DSM 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. None of it was based on experiments or long-term studies or anything like that. And then another thing that sort of proves my point is in the latest, basically every time they revise the DSMs, they're adding more and more and more behaviors. It's not that these behaviors suddenly appeared, it's that they were considered perhaps normal or, at the more extreme case, maybe eccentric when the DSM-2 was put together, but now it's considered extreme deviance and it needs treatment with pharmaceuticals and possibly psychosurgery. Another example of that, what was more recently added to the DSMs, was if you refuse to eat junk food and you only eat healthy food, that's now considered a mental illness. So you can see that many behaviors are actually weaponized and added to the DSM. And once they're added to that, the clinicians look you up in a book and they think it's real. They think these are actual real illnesses and real diagnoses. And it's unbelievable. It's just like everything else in the false matrix of control. It's perversions of reality. And you may have a mental illness. You may be listed in the DSM-4 or 5, and you may be getting treatment for it, and that might make you happy, in which case, more power to you. But it's important for people to understand why we don't hear more about ET contact and why we haven't heard more about it throughout the last 150 years and even longer. It's not that it hasn't been happening, it's been hidden. It's again classified under the term forbidden knowledge. So I'll just continue on page 16. But the treatment, whether surgical or chemical, involves destroying brain tissue and inborn sensory mechanisms so that we no longer have the innate biological technology for paranormal, spiritual, and ET contact. Between 2022 and 2023, there were 42 million mental health related prescriptions dispensed. According to scientificamerican.com, at least 1 in 6 US adults reported taking a psychiatric drug, and rehabs.com reports that psychiatric medications kill more Americans than heroin. Think about that. The whole point of the psychiatric industry is not here to provide mental health, but rather is here to act as a potent tool of social control for use by what I call the parasite class. ET contact must be so threatening to the powers that be that the resultant deaths are considered acceptable collateral damage. And I just have a few final words to end chapter 1 before we start on chapter 2. Now you understand why our memories of ET contact are suppressed before returning to our lives here on Earth. And it is important to note that the process of suppressing our memories is not some form of mental rape. We agree to forget and we cooperate with one or two off-world beings who help us to bury our memories deep. The memories are there, but we cannot access them unless we experience a trigger of sorts. Sometimes we suddenly access a small amount of memory, and at other times we remember quite a lot. And I believe that meditation and hypnotherapy can help. But so far, in my case, I've only used meditation to help me to remember. Further, many people do not believe that ET contact is possible because of the vast distances between planets, solar systems, star clusters, or galaxies. They estimate that it would take thousands of years to travel from point A to point B because they only know about linear space travel. But true space travel is not in any way linear, and a good way of thinking about traveling these vast distances is to imagine that point A becomes point B. The concept of linear travel is propaganda devised to hold us back from our true potential. In truth, we travel directly, transdimensionally, and more about this later in the book. As a final word, please note that this book is ideally suited to those who are capable of flexible thought, but it is written for everyone regardless of mental ability and prior programming. If you are most comfortable believing that we live on an isolated globe sitting in the vacuum of space, then you will enjoy and benefit from this account as much as those who comprehend the many pawns theory or the simulation theory. I have written it from all perspectives, but use language which often fits the globe Earth model so that even those who have the most rigid set of beliefs can benefit from my ET contact experience. You will find that as your awareness expands, you will understand the deeper concepts contained within these writings. I recommend that you reread this book every time you reach a new level of mental and spiritual growth. I believe that an ever-expanding mind is the path to becoming the change we all long for and is the most revolutionary act possible. I just want to pause here and explain what I mean by the many pawns theory. So the many pawns, first of all, there's basically globe Earth theory and there's flat Earth theory. And before you make fun of flat earth theory, please consider it's not one theory, it's many theories. And it's well supported. It's not some weird idea somebody thought up or cooked up. It's actually very, very logical. And so the many ponds theory is the idea that we are living on a surface area much, much bigger than what we believe is our Earth. And it's contained like a habitat. And there are other lands outside of what we know of as our basic continents and oceans. And different beings live there and have different ways of doing things. And so transdimensional reality includes these other, what I call ponds, which are water, bodies of water with continents on them that are completely undiscovered by 99.99% of Earth's population, historically and presently. And so that's what I mean by the many ponds theory. And another theory, which is very well supported, is the simulation theory. Now, simulation theory is real. It's not like it isn't real. It has real life consequences, but it's not what we think it is. What we perceive as solid objects is mostly empty space. And we know that everything in creation sort of bleeps in and out of reality and has the potential to also exist in other realms. This is scientifically proven. You can Google and look up the double slit experiments for evidence, scientific evidence to support that. And there are many other theories as well. And I personally, what's interesting is my experience fits for the simulation theory, the many ponds theory, and the globe Earth theory. And so I'm just asking you to keep an open mind. Just keep an open mind. I'll just continue on page 17. Let's face it, the powers that be do not want us to find and expose full disclosure and all the social, spiritual, and technological advantages that come with it. Join Team Defiance. And if you have ET contact or other paranormal adventures, then share your experiences boldly. It is time. It is now, for the first time in history, we're able to openly talk about this with little fear of being hospitalized, institutionalized, or having treatment forced upon us. So now is the time to come out and to recognize our experiences and share them and strengthen this reality here on Earth. It can definitely help things a lot. So now, I don't have any comments on the live chat yet, so I'm going to continue on chapter 2, my paranormal history and background. And we'll start off on page 19 with intergenerational contact. As far as I know, I am the third generation with a capacity for ET contact. My maternal grandmother was a well-known healer, midwife, and contactee. My mother was an alternative healer who also had robust psychic abilities. And then there is me, and I experience clairaudience, precognitive memory, and other psychic abilities, as well as angelic and ET contact. I believe my maternal grandmother may have been altered on a genetic level so that she could maintain ongoing ET contact throughout her life. As a young child in the early 1900s, my grandmother was raised in an isolated logging camp in eastern Canada. Although there were no other children to play with, she claimed to have made friends with beings who were unknown to her family or community. When she came back from playing out in the woods, presumably by herself, she would tell everyone about her adventures with her friends. Everyone believed her friends were a figment of her imagination, but she insisted they were very real. Starting from when she lived in the logging camp and then later as she moved to small towns, she was able to maintain a close telepathic connection with these friends throughout her life, to the point where she had little use for social human contact outside of her immediate family. In addition to her strange associations, my grandmother had intuitive ways of knowing. She was well known for her natural healing talents, and she never charged money for helping others. Here is an example of her inner, intuitive knowledge about healing. One day, a neighbor who was in a body cast and recovering from back surgery was suffering greatly to the point where the whole neighborhood was disrupted by his constant groans of agony. My mother reported that my grandmother sent a couple of my uncles out to kill a skunk without disturbing it. And as directed, they brought the stink sack from the skunk to her. She cooked this up in a big pot with other ingredients like herbs and fat, and then she fashioned a large swab from a rag on a stick. Then she took these over to treat the suffering neighbor. Grandma dipped the swab into the solution and stuck it down the back of the man's cast to soothe his ailing back. It brought him great relief, and the neighborhood was quiet after that. Grandma's potion was the only thing that helped to ease his suffering. My mother also reported that they never took any pharmaceutical medicines when she was a child. If she or one of her many siblings got sick, had a sore throat or headache, my grandmother would take that child out to the meadow to pick some wild plants. When they returned home with the medicinal plants, my grandmother would brew them up into a tea for the sick child. They always recovered quickly. No one knew how she acquired her knowledge of healing herbs and various concoctions, since she had very little education. But I strongly believe my grandmother's ET friends helped her to have this valuable insight, as she maintained a telepathic connection with them for her whole life. I also suspect that my mother was either genetically altered without her knowledge, or she carried the enhanced genes passed on from her mother. Although the paranormal subject freaked her out, Mother often displayed advanced psychic skills and mysterious ways of knowing about curative healing. She used these therapeutic ways of knowing as an alternative healing practitioner and helped many people without monetary charge. I remember that as an adult, when I would come to visit, I would often find the living room full of people waiting for treatment, and on occasion, they were lined up on the sidewalk out in front of the house waiting to see her. My mother did not even possess a high school diploma, but people came from hundreds of miles away to see her and seek relief from their health issues. On the other hand, ever since the 1960s, my mother and stepfather stealthily avoided social stigmatization, as they correctly feared that my mother would be perceived as having a mental illness disorder because of her psychic abilities. Yeah, people were very much afraid, except for in some small instances, but mainstream society very much afraid of anything to do with psychic abilities. They had plans to aggressively move up the social ladder, but they knew this would be impossible if she were ever gossiped and rumored about and labeled as being weird. She feared losing her imagined social status more than her desire to use her spiritual gifts, so she kept them well hidden. People just believed that my mother was very clever and never questioned her healing advice. Due to my family history, I suspect that my grandmother was genetically altered to become a sort of hybrid, and this made ET contact easier for the successive generations. And I also have a niece who has been very in tune with ETs since childhood. As a young child, she used to wake up in the morning and produce drawings of very complex technology, have knowledge of unknown languages, and was able to draw interesting, detailed diagrams which came to her while she slept. My niece also has intuitive ways of knowing, psychic abilities, and is an energy healer today. On the other side of my family, my birth father was an unusually awake and highly intelligent person who possibly could have had ET contact. After he was divorced by my mother, he hand-built a tiny sailboat called Thumbelina and set off to sail around the world. He traveled without charts or navigation equipment, sailing from Vancouver, BC, Canada, to New Zealand, Fiji, and then he arrived in Japan. Soon after, on his way back to Vancouver, he and his little sailboat went missing off the coast of Japan in what is known as the Dragon's Triangle. No trace of him or his boat were ever found. So there's a number of triangles on the Earth. The Bermuda Triangle is probably the best known. Dragon's Triangle is off the coast of Japan, where there are these weather anomalies and ships, submarines, boats just disappear. Nobody knows where they go. I believe that there are portals. And I believe that my father's little boat was taken transdimensionally into another realm. And he probably stayed there. I wouldn't blame him. So no trace of him or his little boat were ever found. Oh, by the way, I know this is true because I have the newspaper clippings. As my family history would suggest, I believe that I have the genetics for psychic ET communication, and this multi-generational component made me a good candidate for much transdimensional contact. I may also be a hybrid being, but I do not identify as such. Some of us are ordinary people who have extraordinary experiences, and I suspect that we all share the potential for ET contact. I do not think that contactees are special. We have some genetics, or we may have some genetics that have been altered, and many of us have experienced trauma, which gives us the ability to dissociate, as this causes changes to the brain's receiver wavelength, and we become empaths and very good psychic paranormal receivers. Now, there is a section in the book that I'm going to skip over. When you buy the book, you can read this for yourself. It's called Conditions That Prepared Me for Advanced ET Contact. And in there, I give you a very brief look at or insight into some of the traumas I experienced as a child and as a young adult. I'm not going to get into it here. The information is a bit disturbing, but at the same time, I can continue and you can get my message without hearing about that because the information is deeply personal. But the reason I included it was to encourage other people who have been through traumatic events. Now, really, when you look at it, almost everybody has had one trauma or another. And sometimes these traumas hold us back. But quite interestingly, um, when we do the work to deal with what happened to us, and it never should have happened, don't get me wrong, and we do the self-healing necessary, we often find that we have paranormal gifts. And perhaps that is the way source or universal consciousness helps us to have a little extra something to help us to cope and to help us progress and to help us to continue with our soul development. I don't 100% know. I do want to tell you one thing from this section. You may have noticed on the thumbnail, there's a beautiful image of a fiery griffin with a little girl. That is from my childhood experience. So after I had undergone some pretty horrible stuff, my mom married my stepfather, and he was very strict, and that's a very mild way of putting it. And I was terrified all the time. I never had any help to cope with what I had already been through, and my relationship with my stepfather was more than I could bear. And the way it manifested for me was intense, intense fear all the time. When I would go to bed at night, I'd be so scared I would cover myself with my covers, tuck them in around my legs, around my body, have my head beneath the covers, have everything tucked in tight, and I couldn't breathe. I was just too terrified to even open a little passageway for the air to come in. And it was really, really horrible. The other thing that happened to me is I was aware of other realms that my family couldn't see, that people weren't aware of, but I was. And I didn't understand what that was about. I didn't have anybody to talk to me about it or to share what this might be or to alleviate some of my fears. But I knew that there was other beings, and I was terrified that they were gonna take me away, and I didn't know what to expect, and I had very little faith in humanity or anything else because of what I had already been through. So, anyway, one night, this fiery griffin appeared to me, and I was, maybe 5 years old. I may have been in kindergarten, it might have been just before, and I was the age of the little girl in the image behind me. And this fiery griffin was huge, and it was all made up of flames, and it came and it let me know that it would protect me, that it was safe for me to go to sleep, that it would protect me. It was my guardian. And so whenever throughout my childhood I became afraid at night, I would just mentally summon my griffin and it would show up. Now, of course, I didn't know it was a griffin until I was actually in my early 20s and I was looking at a book that had historical so-called fantasy creatures. And then I saw it and I went, oh my God, that's my griffin. That's a griffin. And it basically has the head and wings of an eagle's beak, but its body is like a lion, and it's very distinct. And my griffin, though, was completely made up of flames. So I thought I would share that with you because that, oh, made such a difference, made such a difference. And yeah, so I'm gonna just skip that piece. Like I said, please feel free to go into the links below and order your own book, and you can read up on this section of the book. And I'm just going to quickly check in with the chat. I'm guessing everybody's sleeping in this morning because I don't see any activity in the chat, but they might come along a little later. Some people like to sleep in on a Sunday morning, and this is mountain time. Some people say on the Pacific side, they might still be sleeping and they might come along when they're ready. So I'll just continue. So now I'm going to read from page 25. Nope, I'm not gonna read that either. That is spiritual support for my addictions. So surprise, surprise, after that much trauma, I ended up growing up to be someone who had trouble with addictions. And my primary addiction, besides refined foods and sweets, was alcohol. And actually, in the body, they actually are synthesized and have a very similar effect. And so I had to deal with that. But while I was dealing with that, I had some visions that really helped me to cope and deal with my trauma. And you can read about that again by buying the book. So I'm going to skip ahead to page 26, childhood contact, talk about some of my childhood contact experiences. As I mentioned, my paranormal experiences started when I was a child. I not only felt anxious at home, but I also felt stressed out by social situations like school, and I preferred to be alone with my beloved cat. I had my own reality where I felt connected to all things in nature, and this led to my communication with bugs, plants, and animals, and I was open to contact with other realms too. I don't know how I knew it, but I definitely knew that other realms were close. I was a very sensitive child, a very sensitive adult, and now I am a very sensitive old lady. As with my maternal grandmother, my ET and spiritual guides have always been with me, and they keep me company. I do not physically see them, but I'm aware that they are always nearby. So, yeah, when I was a little girl, I remember going on my way to kindergarten. I used to pick up the caterpillars. So, this must have been in the autumn when I just started kindergarten. And I filled my pockets with caterpillars because I thought they were lost. And when I went to kindergarten, we had a cloakroom where we hung up our jackets, and all these caterpillars climbed out of my pocket and started migrating into the classroom. And the teacher uh, asked who brought the caterpillars, and I said it was me, and I explained that I was rescuing them, and she thought that was very sweet, so she didn't give me heck for it. But I was always talking to bugs, bees, and worms. When it would rain, I would pick the worms up and put them back in the grass because I didn't like to see them struggle on the sidewalk. I always had, a tender heart for all kinds of critters, animals, all kinds of things. So I've always felt that there was an intelligence in everything, even in the plants. And the other thing that's interesting is I was aware of fairies and gnomes and elves and stuff without ever hearing about them in stories. I already knew they were here. I saw them as interdimensional elementals. I didn't have that language for them when I was a child, but looking back, that's how I saw it. So I'll just continue. Then there were those vivid dreams that started when I was preschool age and continued several times a week during my primary school years. While I slept, I was very aware of flying, and the land below me was always in full color. I could fly high above the ground and see the beautiful landscape below me, or travel low and feel the blades of grass caress my legs. I saw mountain ranges, lush forests, gushing rivers, and meadows of wildflowers, and I loved this so much and felt fully conscious during every nighttime adventure. I didn't think anything of it until later when I attended higher elementary school and saw a documentary film showing some aerial recordings. And then I wondered, how did I know what things look like from the air since I had never been on a plane? It was so real to me that I believed that I could fly in my awakened state if only I would fully give myself over to it. So I can remember walking to school, and I lived on the West Coast. It was very, very windy in the autumn, and I would lean into the wind. And I believed that if I could just give myself over to it, if I could just have faith, if I could just trust in my ability to fly, I'd be swept up into the wind and be able to fly. I truly believed that, um, because of all of these amazing dream state flying experiences that I had. It happened so often. It was so lovely, it was so beautiful. That was something that brought great joy into my otherwise kind of sad little life. Not to be victim oriented, just saying how I felt, right? Let's see, how much do I have to read here? Okay, so I'll just finish this page. Also, as a child, I regularly experienced missing time. I liked to go for walks and was often gone for a number of hours, which seemed like only a few minutes to me. And since we were not allowed in the house except for at mealtime, after supper, and at bedtime, I was not missed. This phenomena continued into adulthood. I had the habit of missing social engagements and lost the favor of friends and family as I could not account for the time, where I was, and what I had been up to. I had no explanation. Although I had great trouble with social situations and crowds, I did not consciously avoid them and was troubled by my frequent absences of presence and awareness. So yeah, when I was a little girl, we just weren't allowed in the house. Our parents had no idea where we were. They just didn't want us in the house. They didn't want to hear the noise. They didn't want us to make a mess. Mothers were really into keeping the whole house super clean and tidy all the time before father came home. That was the way it was back then. A lot of moms stayed at home. And we just weren't allowed in the house. So we just went out and wandered around, and I had all this missing time. And this happened even into my adulthood. Typically, as an adult, there I was getting ready to go to a social function. And after I dressed myself, I would sit on the edge of my bed to put on my socks. Then, suddenly, in what I perceived as the same moment, I was instantly back after about 4 or 5 hours had passed. And here I was again, sitting on the edge of my bed, putting on my socks with no knowledge of where I had been or what I was doing during my absence. By this time, the natural lighting in the room had dramatically shifted, which indicated that something was off and prompted me to look at the clock to see how much time had passed. As usual, when this happened, the social event was over and there was no point to continue putting on my socks because now it was time for me to put on my pajamas. So, yeah, that was really, really weird. Now, some people would say that's evidence of abduction, alien abduction, and maybe it is. Just like some people would say that all of those dreams of me flying above the landscape may have been me in a UFO. And apparently, these type of UFOs, can become transparent. You can see the land below you. But I don't have any memory of being abducted or having interaction with any extraterrestrials. So I'm not going to make it up. If it's not what I experience and have actual memories of, I'm not going to put it in the book. So that's just how it is. Um, where am I? Okay. Although inconvenient, my circumstances were not always negative because I frequently received loving support from my spiritual guides in the form of lucid dreams and spontaneous knowledge. As a child, whenever I tried to tell my mother or family about my contact, they admonished me and said that I had an overactive imagination and I shouldn't talk like that because people would think that I was crazy. My parents were very concerned about what other people thought about us and our social standing, and that's actually really common at the time. So I'm going to just finish off this little section, but before I do, I am going to just run, for those of you who aren't familiar, I am going to run a very quick promotion, only 2 minutes long, for my book and tell you a little bit more about it and where you can find it. So I'll be right back. Transdimensional, Meet the New Neighbors. Check out my new book available from Amazon bookstores worldwide and read the stunning details about ET diversity and culture, along with their advanced ways of living and expressing spirituality, which is in no way like anything imagined here on Earth. Transdimensional, Meet the New Neighbors introduces you to many different ET beings, the healing pods, the interior of the big ship, my orientation process, cultural events, and off-world mating practices. When I tucked myself into bed for the night back in 2014, I had no idea that I would be transported to the big ship, meet many different extraterrestrial races of beings, become well acquainted with their culture, and visit numerous interesting worlds. While away, I learned a great deal about the big ship, intergalactic and transdimensional travel, intergalactic planetary research, and the various options for resettlement. My true life adventures continued night after night, and I had never experienced anything like this before. The first few times that I awoke back at home, I convinced myself that it had all been some kind of a fantastic dream. But while away, I was eating, sleeping, learning, and visiting, all the while experiencing what I perceived as days, weeks, and months. I am so happy to present you with my true, nonfiction account of my weird little life and the more important messages from beyond our realm that I have been tasked to share with all of you. It is my hope and sincere desire that I will inspire you to acknowledge your own transdimensional abilities and experiences so that together we can become the change we wish to see in our world. Paperback and Kindle editions are now available at all Amazon bookstores. Go to the Amazon website, select the bookstore or Kindle store, and enter Transdimensional Meet the New Neighbors by Karen Holton. The Audible version is coming out soon. And we're back. So, where we left off, I was talking about I talked a bit about my experiences while I was asleep of flying and what that was like. My special relationship with bugs and animals and plants. And then I talked a bit about missing time. And then I moved on to how I had tried to talk to my family about what I was experiencing and how they just basically really were strongly encouraged me to be quiet about it. And the reason is because in those days, if your friends, family, neighbors thought you were weird, you were shunned from society. And my parents had plans. So I'll just continue from there. It's on page 28 if you want to follow along. I also had some special perceptual abilities, but again, my family would tell me that these personal observations were faulty and I should stop talking about them because someone might think that I was crazy. My family tried to train me to become a different kind of person and to go against my nature. But regardless of their efforts and punishments, I remained authentic because these were my true experiences. I always knew that there was so much more to life, and since I was spiritually minded, I joined various religions over the years to try to find explanations for my observations. Unfortunately, the ministers, priests, and pastors all taught me that this type of experience was from demons, and I was strongly discouraged from ever talking about it. Ultimately, if I chose personal loyalty, I would be perceived as being crazy or wicked, which somehow deserved the ridicule, fear, and social stigmatization I would face as a result. Eventually, I learned to stuff my paranormal reflections down deep and denied them even to myself. Later, when I was in my late teens, about 1973, I had a shared paranormal experience with my younger brother, Dan. We were both receiving ET communications while we slept, and these communications were remembered as vivid dreams. Dan and I had the same experience, which doesn't surprise me, as Dan and I are from the same mother and father. My other siblings and I share the same mother, but have different birth fathers. We were invited to join off world beings on a physical spaceship destined to travel to another world. I was not talking about this because I thought I was imagining it and was tired of being labeled as a troublemaker. But the next time I saw Dan, he shared with me that he was having the very same invitation and experience. We decided to go. But the night we were supposed to leave, we both received vivid dreams warning us not to go because something was wrong with the situation. The next day, Dan told me he had seen in a vision that there was a terrible accident and some of our off world friends were killed. That is all I know. I kept listening for ET contact back then, but there was only silence for many years. And I'm going to end it there for today. Next week, I'm going to get into my adult contact, all the things that led up to my basically chapters 3 all the way through and including chapter 8 is all about my actual ET experience as I remember it from 2014. But when I talk about my adult contact, it's all the different forms of contact that I had before 2014. And I think the most interesting experience that I had was with an angel. Basically, I'm not sure if it was an angel or angels because of the way it manifested itself to me, but I'll tell you all about that and what came from that. And I believe that that set me up for extraterrestrial contact. I'll also share with you some of my real-time UFO sightings, and I'm going to tell you about my friend Bob the Gray. Bob the Gray is what we would consider a stereotypical gray, and how I met him and how he had input into my life. And then I'm going to talk about my pre-birth agreements, my higher purpose, and what else? Well, I guess that's about it. And for today, though, I'll share with you an image of Bob the Gray. He's also in miniature on the cover of my book. And of course, this is an AI depiction of Bob the Gray, not an actual snapshot. But I was quite surprised to find that when I work with AI, I'm able to get it to draw very close to my real life experience. So I guess that's about it for Aliens and Angels for today. Whether you are listening in the background as I go live, or whether you are watching or listening to the replay, or on any of the audio platforms, I want to wish you all the very, very best. Keep dreaming, keep believing, keep examining some of those experiences that you may have had that are similar to mine in the past. Many, many people have those incredibly vivid dreams of flying. As I say throughout my book, I'm not that unique. There are other people who have very similar experiences. And I think it's time to stop doubting ourselves and to start embracing that we're transdimensional beings, that our bodies, our minds, our consciousness are very high level technologies. And this is our birthright. And I think this is the thing that is going to emancipate human beings and get us ready to join the fellowship of all the transdimensional beings, whether they're extraterrestrial or, there's so many different kind of beings. I'm going to get into all of that next week. So I hope you'll join me again next week. I'm just going to check the chat. There's Rhea F. Thumbs up and hearts. Thank you, Rhea. Thank you for joining us today. And maybe if you missed the beginning, please do go back and watch the replay. I'll be posting that right away on YouTube and all other platforms very, very shortly. Oh, thank you for joining us. And I hope everyone's having a happy new year and wishing you all the best. If you live in California, sending much love and best wishes and prayers that you're all safe and that you've made it through that horrible ordeal safely. And I guess that is about it for today. So I'm going to say goodbye, and we'll see you maybe Wednesday if you'd like to join us. I have an interesting guest on the Quantum Guide Show. And otherwise, I'll see you next Sunday. So bye-bye, everybody. Take care. Love you all. Thank you for joining me for the Aliens and Angels podcast. Read about my true life ET contact in my book called Transdimensional Meet the New Neighbors, which is now available on Amazon worldwide. Subscribe to my YouTube, Rumble, and X channels at Karen Holton TV. The like button and leave me a comment, and please do share this podcast with your friends. Check out my website at www.karenholtonhealthcoach.com to see my free resources and amazing products and services. All of the links will be in the description below. As part of the Forbidden Knowledge Network, you will also find the Quantum Guide Show with Karen Holton on all audio platforms. Until next time, keep up the good work.